Welcome to the episode of Just More Fix. This is James. With me this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justmorefix.com and on Twitter at justmorefix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon and you can give us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to talk about vampire hunting. And now it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Willie D. Nelson from All Things Good and Nerdy, a pop culture podcast, part of the Gonna Geek Network. Just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other tantalizingly geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to Just More Fix. Real quick before we get started today, we have, as this episode drops, the Hastings Party zines are in the mail. So if you are a Patreon supporter, keep an eye on your mailboxes. Those have all gone out in the mail and should be arriving to you whenever the United States Postal Service deems fit to get them there. If you're a Kickstarter backer, they have all been printed, and I will be sending out the links to the download for the PDFs of Worms and Hastings Party. And the plan is to ship the zines at the same time as the Three Sisters zine, so all three of those zines will go out all at once. But we are going to get the PDFs out to you guys within the next couple days here. So look for those in your mailbox or email box. Yeah, that too. All right, right on today. All right, so today we are going to talk about, I guess we weren't really sure what we were going to talk about, and we were just sort of brainstorming a little bit and kind of led into a discussion about tools of the trade for hunting vampires. And Lacey, we've mentioned before, has a game where we're playing vampires, essentially hunting vampires, right? We're part of this coterie and this group that essentially kills vampires. And so do you just want to set up where you think things fell flat, and then we'll kind of go from
know that they fell flat.
Well, I mean,
that's a fair assessment.
No. Okay, that's wrong words, but where you weren't satisfied with what was in the game, I guess is a better way to say it.
So I went to run this game, and I just sort of rubber to the road started the thing, and I was like, ooh, what would be fun? Well, our kids all like Blade, so I thought I would go with vampires hunting vampires. Yay, right? Everybody wins. Plus, I thought they would get a lot of men out of disciplines in vampire because they're basic powers. So then I made this organization called the Order of the True Death that basically assigns you guys missions, very much like Orpheus style or like Night's Black Agent style, any of those sort of organizational mission type thing. But then when we went to set up the coterie, so there is some stuff in the new system, and there are some fiddly bits equipment-wise, but it pretty much just has a short section that says basically whatever there is in Mortal World you can acquire here, sans any stats or information in that section. And then there are a handful of, somewhat interesting extra things that they've created. Scopes that let you see supernatural creatures, sleeping bags that let you sleep in the sun, all manner of different grenades and bullets that explode, cause fire damage, and that kind of thing. But just not really robust. And I guess it got me thinking, well, the one I always fall back on when we start talking about the government assigned missions is like Connex, right? And their system for equipment is ample.
Yeah. So yeah, their base creation system is very large. So the way it works for Connex is that every character gets a certain amount of points depending on what their career path was and stuff. And then you get to allocate that many points to their base, basically. And you can buy basically anything that's available within the government. So there's a lot there. If you're not a person who likes shopping and equipping stuff like that, it can get a little tedious sometimes, I feel like, but there is a lot there. So yeah.
Yeah. Equipment shopping, I feel like it's kind of fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is, but I guess, let me say this. I agree that it is to a point, but there is a line, at least for me, where, and I think it is related to two things. One, how much there is to choose from, because sometimes I want my options pared down from the beginning so that I don't have to sort through 30 pages of different choices of things, right? The other part of it is that it's how long does it take? And not just for me, but for the entire table. Because like in Connex, if we're playing a Connex game, let's say we have 4 people at the table, 4 agents and a GM, then I've got to buy mine, you've got to buy yours. And by the time it's done, it's kind of like, oh my God, are we done yet? So that part of it can kind of turn me off a little bit too. Now, once it's done, it's really cool to have all those things sort of sitting there and able to use from and find creative uses for. The only criticism that I have of it, though, is sometimes you buy things you think are going to be useful and then they're not. But that's sort of on the GM's part to sort of look at your equipment you have to make sure it's useful. And then that ties into Knights Black Agents or any gumshoe system with the preparedness, where you just have so many points of preparedness and then you just spend those points to say, oh, I brought my suitcase bomb with me or whatever it is you need in that moment.
Which is cool. And in Vampire, you have the resources thing, which,
money
given the amount of time you could acquire whatever it is. The other thing, though, that I like about ConX is you get like a career package that comes with contacts. And so when I'm looking at the Vampire system and 7 points in backgrounds, sounds like it's a lot, but it's really not when you start adding in, do you want allies? Do you want contacts?
Right.
Do you want influence? And then also, like, if somebody wants to have enough resources for you guys to be able to acquire things, that's a large portion of their background spend right there. And I like the idea of you're part of this organization. Somewhere there is a man named Stan who can find you the information you need, and you don't have to have him written down as a contact that you spent money on, because he's part of this organization that's designed for you to reach out. I mean, certainly, having other contacts outside of that does take time and experience to build up. But
I think there's a couple ways to handle that in terms of like from the organization standpoint, right? So if it's just assume like you're talking about you're part of this larger organization that does these contract killings or whatever, right? So you may not have to buy every single contact that the organization has, right? But if you have status within the organization, that means you would know who is loyal and who does what. And so you could go to them and sort of spend your status more or less to say, I need you to do this thing for me, right? So it's not necessarily that those individuals are your actual contacts. It's more like they're the organization's contacts, and you're going to leverage your position within the organization to get what you need, right? So that's one way you could go about doing it. But the other way I think would be, I had a second one, but I can't remember what it was now. Yeah, I don't know, it's gone. But either way.
I guess mostly I'm just using a system to do something that it wasn't really designed to do, and it's working, but there's just some areas where I feel like it falls a little short.
I think I'm going to push back on that just a little bit, okay? So I don't think that it's not that Vampire wasn't designed to do that, because if you look at the entire World of Darkness line, it's basically designed to do nearly anything. It's just those pieces and fiddly bits aren't in the main Vampire book.
Right, because that's not what the main Vampire book is designed to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is, but it's not in a way, because I think
if it was, they wouldn't have to make all.
Well, but like, I think generally speaking, people that are playing Vampire are leaning more towards the social aspect of the game and less towards just the raw hunter side of the game, right?
Right.
And that's where I was that is the second thing I was going to mention, is that when you're talking about buying and spending those points to have those contacts, it's one of these things where when we're sitting down to play a hunter game, it's kind of like, well, we need to have some of these contacts, but I also need to be able to live. And so that means I need to have a base level of sort of disciplines and powers that are going to grant me a certain amount of survivability in a given job, right? So initially, maybe that's where the points go. And then you slowly build up your contacts and resources and that kind of stuff afterwards, because if you can have all as you want, but if you can't survive the first fight, then it's sort of irrelevant, right? So I think it's just sort of a point allocation thing and how much risk you're willing to take. And then at the same time, when in this specific game, we laid this out initially as like a Blade style game, right? So when you think of Blade, it's him running around and murdering people and cutting people in half, right? So that sort of says, hey, buy cool powers, right? Not buy Blade's social network that doesn't exist.
Well, but he does also have sun bullets and stakes and a crossbow that fires.
I'm not saying that as like a shot.
An entire amazing base full of technological and research equipment.
But I think you also have to look at your audience of people, because you had when we set up the game too, and what you were talking about, you're like, oh, there's all these cool powers. You start talking about the different disciplines and stuff like that.
That's fair.
So I think it's just like that's what the new hotness was. So that's where the points went, right? Because those are more exciting than saying, well, I know 12 guys that can get me information. That's not as exciting as saying I can punch holes through concrete. Do you know what I mean? You know? So I'm not saying that as like a shot. I'm just saying that's just sort of when you have people.
But even in general, I feel like if we sat down and we had everybody geared that direction, you automatically get 2 or 3 dots of discipline at the beginning.
3. You get 1 at 2 and 1 at 1 in these systems.
You end up getting 1 depending on the feeding group. But anyway, so you end up with some dots in the disciplines anyways. And then if you make you only get the 7 background points. If you make Neonate
get 0, Ancilla's get 15. I think.
15. So 15 more experience even if you spent all of those 15 in background, you would probably begin to have something that would be fleshed out like an actual base and system.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
When you're allocating those points, right, too, you have to consider some of them better go to where you're living or you're just going to die.
Right, yeah.
Right? You have to spend some of them on territory that you own, security of your haven, and that kind of stuff. We can get into the other things.
Right. No, I don't disagree. I also think, though, that in terms of, this is going to be a little bit in the weeds on the mechanics and system of Vampire, but if you're making a character and you're given 30 experience up front, my inclination initially is to spend those points on high cost items experience-wise, which would be your disciplines, and instead of spending them on several small things, because as the game progresses and I get 1, 2, or 3 points of experience per game, I can then work towards buying 1 dot and then 1 more dot and then 1 more dot and slowly build that up instead of just having this large jump of boom, now I've got the 3rd dot in potence or whatever it is. Do you know what I'm saying? And that just suits my style of play better because I kind of like to slowly build my character as opposed to have these big jumps and like now I bought this dot in potence or whatever. And sometimes it's unavoidable, I realize, but initially out the gate, that's the way I approach it. So
I mean, that makes sense. And I don't know if it's at everybody's table or if it's even written in anywhere, but when it comes to like spending experience, it's always you have to justify that too.
Yeah.
So even though you have suddenly 3 experience points to spend, I'm not going to give you level 3 criminal contacts when you had 0 before or whatever.
But I think in the game,
that doesn't make literary sense.
Right. But during the play of the game, though, ideally, you're probably trying to work to find those people that can get you that information. So my thought is that you're always going to be constantly working towards that. And then you can be buying contacts that are immediately relevant to the game that you're playing right now. Right. Because potence is generally always relevant, or fortitude or auspex, office, whatever the discipline is. Right. Generally speaking, there's always a way to make that relevant. Right. But if I buy high society contacts or if I buy finance contacts, maybe that isn't relevant to the investigation we're doing right now. Do you know what I'm saying? So I don't know. It's just, I think it's just a style of play thing for how you sort of build your characters and advance them or whatever in that case. So, but initially what kind of got us talking about this before we had settled on an episode was that the mundane versus sort of supernatural aspect of how you go about hunting vampires.
Then you were like, well, do we even need any of that stuff because we have vampire disciplines?
So I am going to say yes, you always, it's best to have both, right? So before we go down that rabbit hole of mundane versus supernatural, I think there's important to mention a couple things where there's some resources where if you want to do this style of game that you can find additional things to add to your vampire game, right? We've already mentioned Connex, which you'll have to do some fiddling to sort of transfer it over, you know what I mean? You know, in terms of what the cost would be. What else we mentioned?
I think they just have the most complete list of things you might want.
Yeah. The preparedness is an interesting thing to port over from Knights of Black Agents. I think would be cool, but that I think would only bring over for your experience, like whether they're special ops.
Well, it makes sense to me that maybe you could make that a survival role, similar to making etiquette a social test.
Okay, yeah,
like you have points in etiquette, so I would have known, or I have points in politics, I would have known not to do that. You know, oh, I have survival, I would have known to bring that.
Well, I kind of thought about using stuff like that, similar to how Gumshoe is, where you can spend your points. Now, it's not permanently; it's per game, right? So if you've got 4 dots in Streetwise, you would just know, oh, I shouldn't be here. Okay, cool. So if you want to spend a point of Streetwise for session, you can just say, this is certain territory for whichever gang, and like that kind of stuff. I really like that idea.
And I kind of like that better than, because I did make people make rolls. There were quite a few Streetwise rolls for knowing, you should have asked about this, should have done that. Right. What kind of area is this? And I missed the point spin system for Gumby when it comes to stuff like that.
It's a really interesting way to do it, and I think we don't have a lot of experience with Knights Black Agents, but we do have a lot of experience with preparedness per se, right? From other Gumshoe systems. But it's really cool the idea of the way it works, because in terms of the Gumshoe world or the Knights Black Agents world, James Bond always has the thing that he needs. It's just like, oh, hey, Q happened to give me this laser watch or whatever, right? So it's cool to see that. Or Jason Bourne, he knows, oh, I've only got this one strip of wire and duct tape, so I'm going to rig up the fuse box to blow, or whatever it is, right? So you mentioned Orpheus, and there's some things.
So I was thinking for Crucible, and just the fact that Orpheus is a large organization that on mission to exterminate things. I can't believe it didn't occur to me before to look in those books for some relevant resources. And then, of course,
I think it's the second book that has the Crucible merits and flaws in there. So then there's a large section of them. Now, some of them won't be immediately relevant to Vampire, but some of them will, because they're sort of more mundane things or in line with sort of the themes of Vampire, with dealing with supernatural stuff or whatever.
Pretty well. Obviously, World of Darkness Hunter system as well, which I have never run, and I think I played in twice. So I'm not familiar with what is and isn't there, but I'm sure that there's probably something incredibly relevant.
There's a lot there in Hunter. Now, I'm not super familiar with Hunter the Vigil, but I am with Hunter the Reckoning. And Hunter the Reckoning has lots of different choices of things, but one of the key ones is called Arsenal. And it's just weapons and guns and explosives and that kind of thing, right? So, and it's just like any other White Wolf thing from 1 to 5. So it's an easy way to handle it. Now, a lot of these, I feel like they're just sort of like additional things to stack onto your Haven, right? As however you want to kind of handle that or whatever. But there's a lot of them there that will come straight across right over, right?
Right.
There's another one called Demon Hunter X, if I'm remembering correctly. I have the book downstairs, but I haven't looked at it in ages. But they have like an X-Tech section that you could probably check out. Now, some of the X-Tech stuff is pretty far out there. It's like cybernetic stuff, pretty close, and some pretty extreme stuff. But there is some stuff in there that if you're in today's day with a little bit of extrapolation, not going too far, you could include that kind of stuff in your game. And it has costs for things that are more mundane of nature, guns, bombs, tracking stuff, whatever, surveillance things. So I'm trying to think if there's any other White Wolf things. Without getting into other specific supernatural stuff, I think those are the 2 or 3 main sources you're going to look at for mundane things that you could use. So Orpheus, Hunter, both the Reckoning and the Vigil, and Demon Hunter X.
All right, Dark Inquisitor might not be bad either. So, some of the tried and true methods are just never go out of style.
Yeah. If you want a true faith element in there, the Dark Ages Inquisitor book is phenomenal.
Just aside from that, staking things and setting them on fire, like the classics,
right.
The classic extermination.
Right. So how did we get to the mundane versus supernatural part of this?
Well, I was just kind of rattling off the fact that I felt like there wasn't enough stuff, and they were like, yeah, but vampires.
Yeah.
And, whether or not all of those things are directly relevant. I mean, we talked about doing the resources spend, which is, I don't know. I would rather do the work on the front end, I guess is where I'm at, than have to stop in the middle and figure out, make a list of what I need and how we're going to get it, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
I would just rather at the beginning be like, okay, well, we outfitted our base. This is the things we have. Now let's figure out what we're going to take with us. It just seems faster to me.
It is. In some ways it isn't, and in some ways it's not. But the one thing that I was going to kind of go to was that what it does is that it sort of resources as a background sort of cheapens that entire experience. It's just like, well, my character, I intentionally knew, well, we're going to be doing all kinds of crazy jobs. Probably just be a good idea to have a lot of cash on hand, right? So my character has 4 dots on resources because money solves all problems in this kind of a situation, generally speaking, right? So that was my sort of catch-all.
If you have the time.
Well, yeah, but that was sort of my catch-all to say, oh, we need a throwaway car. Okay, I'll just go buy $1,000 car. It doesn't even factor into my resources. Oh, we need some firearms. Okay, I'll just go buy those. Okay. And it solves a lot of that kind of problem. And in some ways, I feel like if you want a more robust system, having that sucks the life out of a lot of those other backgrounds. Now, I think the solution you hit on already is if you just say, fine, you can use your resources to get whatever you want, it just is going to add more time. Whereas if you just had Arsenal, you just have these things, or you have a direct good relationship with a person who sells illegal firearms or whatever it is, and you can just go pick those up, right?
Right.
So, but all that said, I also kind of feel like the mundane stuff works, but when you're really trying to take down vampires and you're just a neonate, it's hard to beat good discipline choices and lots of machine guns. But
you need lots of machine guns, so you say.
So I don't know. I kind of come down on both sides. I think it's important to have both, but if I had to choose one over the other, I'm generally, I don't know. Because in our case, Masquerade is still a factor. We're trying to not break the Masquerade openly, right? So, because if the Masquerade is out, well, then it's just supernatural powers and fire. That's really all you need, right? So, be damned. Masquerade be damned. But I don't know. Like, what do you think?
I like powers, and they're really, really awesome against mortals. But anytime you're with a vampire, like, the difference point-wise in discipline between a neonate and an ancilla is not not significant enough to say that you're going to way outweigh someone that they couldn't, and some of it just depends on the disciplines that you do have.
That's where I was going to go. So like the difference.
But it's always, I would not want to be involved in that fight. You know what I mean? If it's just going to be like one-on-one, head-to-head, to me, to even be successful at all, it's planning and execution of plan.
So I don't disagree that planning and execution is always the biggest factor in success.
And that plan is never going to be. We go toe to toe, discipline versus discipline.
I think it depends on the vampire you're going against, because in our case, in that first game that we played, our first set of games we played, right, our first target was a Bruja. So we know they're potentially, we know they're fast and they're strong and they have social power. So on my end as a player and my character, knowing that, I was like, well, we just want to avoid any just plain old regular physical altercation, because that could potentially go bad. If it was nearly any other clan, bring it. Because fortitude will wear out, right? So like that's just the reality of it, right? So if we're talking about adventure or something, right, we just put ourselves in a position where we're not going to be able to be dominated, and you just crap out of them, right? Whether that includes firearms and potent.
I mean, gangrel, that Protean can be pretty darn nasty. Plus their ability to escape is
I don't disagree, but Protean is the other one that anything that has potence or celerity and Protean. Now, that's without getting into the weeds about some of the other smaller clans and that kind of stuff. But if you're looking at your 7 cam clans, those are the ones that I am concerned about, right? Is that your Bruja, potentially your, what do you call them? Toreador, Nosferatu.
Toreador.
Speed. Celerity will just destroy you.
That's true.
I've seen many people go down to Toreadors that I had because they misjudged. I don't see him ever do any celerity. And then lo and behold, well, that's my trump card. That's my survival card, okay? I can always run away, and I will, in older systems of White Wolf, it was just more action. So it was like, cool, I'm going to stab you 3 times, and then I'm going to run away, and you're going to realize I should probably not come do that plan again, because I'm just going to get stabbed again, you know?
See, I feel like every single clan can be potentially dangerous in a fight. It's not like there's one clan that's like, okay, that guy, I got him, no problem. I don't
disagree, but when we're talking about numbers and our survivability, I'm confident in the fact that if we can get them 4-on-1 or 4-on-2, that it's going to go our way. So in my case, I'm a thin blood. So I'm kind of a wild card because I'm a thin blood and I can walk around in the daylight and that kind of stuff, right? So I just present an interesting challenge and fear element for any of our targets, right? But other than that, we have a gangrel, we have a Bruja, I believe, and we have a Ventru. So we have a good mix of disciplines and survivability, because everyone's character is kind of designed to be able to have some. Who's Cative?
Oh yeah, that's right. I was like, what the hell?
Okay, so that's my bad.
She's playing like an old school Malkav, basically. Aspects, obfuscate with the personality quirks.
So yeah, and really, obfuscate is just the most god awful, because especially when you combine obfuscate with mundane stuff, Molotov cocktails, bomb, a gun to the back of the head, whatever it is. It's just, I think.
I just don't see a lot of scenarios where you don't need stuff and you only need power. Like, you're always going to need some way to track the person, follow the person, some sort of weapon or car or some other means, some other burnable material to enact whatever plan you're going to come up with.
I think it comes down to, we're going to use those as a tool to finish things with our discipline.
You guys didn't do your extermination with any discipline?
We blew up his house? What did we do?
Smash his car.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was a creative solution that
well, I feel like that's
used.
What really is what you're after, is the creative solution.
I don't disagree. So I'll just set this up. So we happened to, and this is just using resources that we had, right? So for some reason, this almost never happens in a game. I have 1 point in drive, and we have 2 other characters have 3 points in drive. That's a lot of drive that you just generally don't have on character sheets. So it was like, hey, because I started asking around, I was like, around the table, what skills are we actually good at? So we can try and put ourselves in a position where we're making use of our skills. So drive was what we were strongest at. And so I thought, well, it's a little risk. So we boxed the person in on the interstate with 2 semis and a car in front of them. And the semi there was a semi behind them and a semi to the left of the car. And then a car that was in front of our target. So they kind of had them boxed in. And then the semi in the left lane just sort of came over and forced them into the concrete pillars for a bridge embankment. And the semi behind them finished the job. So, crash at 80 miles an hour, half the damage or not, it's sort of completely irrelevant, really. And then we Molotov cocktailed the car and then filled it full of bullets and the whole bit. So, I'll concede the fact that was an entirely mundane solution. But our contingency plan, though, was our gangrel.
Lots of Protean.
He was in the rear semi that was going to smash it into the bridge embankment, right? And if he got out, our plan was to have bullets be the distraction and have our gangrel dice him up with wolf claws and do some mag damage. So, I think the mundane stuff is what always starts it. But my fallback and my primary thing that I think I'm going to do the majority of the work with is my disciplines. Because, I think I want to force them into a position where I know their abilities and I want them in a spot spot where they can't use their abilities, or they've already amassed a certain amount of damage to where I can finish them off where there's little risk to me.
Right.
So I don't know. I was happy with that solution because I've killed lots of vampires, and I was like, let's, I was just sort of trying to puzzle them out, and I was like, oh, we have lots of drive. What are we doing? Let's just smash this guy's car. So, because we were looking at the old fashioned, bomb his house or set his house on fire and all that kind of stuff, and it was like, we did this much. We just mapped his route out, GPS his car. We knew he's going this way. Cool. Semis on the highway. No big deal. Cause smash, problem solved. Bob's your own. So yes, but what I will say is not trying to break the masquerade and does drive you towards the mundanes, but I also feel like the mundane ones, it's sort of hard to repeat them because you sort of get this MO for
Well, but I've never said that the masquerade wholly applies to you guys. In fact, I've said it doesn't. But the thing is,
we'll bring some heat down that we don't want.
Right, exactly. That's the thing, is that the Camarilla, regardless of whether or not you're part of the Camarilla, pays attention to that. And just like anybody else, you don't want to be hunted.
Right. No, I don't disagree. But also, if you have this sort of standard method, like if we did this semi-killing another time and a third time, then it's going to be...
Well, then you get the mortalogen.
But like other vampires know...
Semi-serial killing.
But other vampires would know if you're on the highway, you cannot be around semis,
right.
So it brings a certain amount of attention down on you. Also, then it's just a matter of tracking you down because now who's buying semis to smash on the highway and all this kind of stuff, right? So I guess that's part of the reason why I also want to go more towards disciplines and the supernatural element of it, because you can't track that. You can't track my potence, right? But if I buy loads of guns and claymores and a semi...
tracking criminal contact networks.
Right. So, I don't know. I think that especially when you're less powerful, the mundane stuff is much better because you can put yourself at much less risk. But as your power grows, provided that you have a good amount of information on your target and you know what their abilities and capabilities are, it's less risk, I guess, if that makes sense. So the other thing is that I've ran a tremendous amount of vampire. Some have seen and planned and been planned on, loads of times about how to do it. So I feel like I have a fairly good, amount of experience doing it, which is sort of in some ways is kind of unfair, but at the same time, I still find it fun and entertaining to do because it's like solving a puzzle in a different way or whatever, Yeah, I try to. And the other thing is on my end of things, this is why it never gets boring to me, is every time I try to not reuse the same plan that I've used in other games because that's boring. There's some old faithfuls like gas lines, gas leaks, and that kind of stuff or whatever, So my favorite was I had a person's house rezoned. It was kind of rundown house. This is in LARP. I had it rezoned and then had it scheduled for demolition through a paperwork mistake with bureaucracy influence. And they demolished their home, their haven, with like a big high boom, high ho crane thing, and in the daylight, obviously, because construction workers don't work at night. So it was noon and their house came down. Yeah, that was a good one. God, I miss those moments. So, yeah. All right, so this was focusing a lot on like story-driven parts of this, right? Where it's GM or players versus the GM characters, right? What about when we're talking about player versus player at the table, where we've got, as always does happen, every coterie fails, right? So do you see that there's more important? No, what I'm saying,
we're talking about hunting, being a hunter, not you made me mad, so I'm gonna try and kill you. That's different.
I think so. But like it could devolve into hunting because, like, in a way, if it's not like a rage kill, you're going slow, methodical, plotting how to kill them, like in a way that is sort of hunting. I guess what I'm trying to get down to is there a difference you see when you're playing a game where it's a standard hunter game where it's mundane versus supernatural abilities, what you need to have, versus if it's you taking on another player? Or do you think the same logic still applies?
Mostly the same logic still applies, but you have the advantage in this scenario because you're part of a larger organization. Right. So you have that status or pull, plus you have a group of people that are to kill someone and not just pull. Mm-hmm. So there's always, more heads, more ideas, more resources.
All right. I don't know, it's just interesting. So, like in that game we played, I think we spent 2 sessions, basically a full session and a half planning and evaluating. And then
there's a lot of, it's different too because there's a lot of intel collection that goes on for that. Whereas if you're talking about murdering someone who's a player, you probably already know quite a bit about their patterns, what kind of abilities they have, their contacts, at least a general, if you've been playing the game, you ought to have at least a general idea of what they're capable of. You may not know everything, but
hopefully you don't. That's how you survive. You don't ever show them everything, no matter what. No, I just was thinking because in that game, we've spent a full session investigating and tracking them down and trying to identify a way to find some weaknesses, right? Then the second session, about the first half of it was sort of spent with some more investigation and then planning and then executing the plan. So
murderosity, like the very last, the last 10 to 20%.
Well, that's the other thing about it. And it comes down to this kind of hunting stuff is that I feel like there's this sweet spot of the amount of investigation that needs to be done and work that has to be done into each target, because if it's sort of like episodic where it's like every session we kill another creature, like if you want to run a Monster of the Week game, that's fine, but I don't feel like that's the way Vampire is structured, right? So if you want to be part of this thing, I'm all about it. It's cool, but I think you have to.
Well, and that's where I kind of took a cue from Orpheus too, because not every mission is an extermination operation.
Right.
Some are just investigation. Some are other things like right now, but they're not all murdery, right?
Well, it could be very easily be in a situation very similar to Orpheus, where if you know these agents or hunters or whatever aren't powerful enough to take on this entity, then their job isn't to kill him. Their job is to go in and do the legwork and the investigation, provide that intel to someone who then gets that handed off to them to go do the actual work, which is sort of the way.
I kind of thought about structuring a mission where it was like, well, we can tell there's obviously some vampire activity happening in this area, but we haven't managed to narrow down who or how many or any of the other details. So like your region or area of a town or neighborhood, investigate, what's going on here, or even like a business,
So I have a weird question, kind of goes along this, is that it doesn't happen so much in tabletop Vampire, but in LARP, there's lots of people that are coming for you all the time. So there's a lot of thought and effort that goes into your character's haven and your defenses, your routine from when you leave Elysium and go home, right? So there's all this thought that's put into that. Well, in a lot of Vampire games, it doesn't come up because those games are more focused towards the political side of things, right? But in LARP, it's the politics is still there, but there's more one-on-one sort of coming at people and trying to get at them or destroy them or use that where their haven is as leverage over them or whatever, right? So in a game where that is actually the focus, right? We're trying to find people's havens and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of work and a lot of thought that goes into a lot of havens, right? And in this case, we didn't take this guy at his haven at all. So did you put effort in trying to think about what his haven looked like and what his security was like and that kind of stuff? Because it was like, well, here's his haven. Ooh, let's just not go there because that's his where he's strong. We're just like, forget that. Let's just smash him into a pillar.
Well, to me, that's the smartest one, because you're never going to get a close look at someone's haven. You'd be, these layout and what kind of things spec you go there and catch them out in the world. And that just seems like the best choice to me, because then they're not Tori we're strongest. You can see them. You can map out how, exactly physically you would like it to go.
I agree.
If you're trying to destroy the entire haven in general, but if you're trying to actually go in after a particular person without doing a lot of collateral damage, that's like a nigh impossibility.
Because I've played in regular Hunter games, Hunter of the Reckoning games, where it was more like John Carpenter style, where we kicked in a door and went in there and laid waste to everything.
But I will say I did not give his haven a ton of thought. I knew he was going to have a lot of gang security because he was very well connected. But I was just kind of waiting to see which direction I thought you guys were going to go before I put that much planning into it.
Well, that's where I was kind of going.
And you guys seemed to kind of away from going after his haven. So I was like, well, didn't think about that too hard then.
Right. That's where I was kind of going with it. Is there's a lot of potential work that you may need to have to do for haven, because if you just waltzed into someone's haven and then just offed them, I'd be happy for the success. But at the same time, I'd feel like, man, that was a little too easy, I almost think. You know what I mean?
Well, and to be honest, there isn't any reason that you couldn't just plan several havens, use them up, because while they're all very secure, it doesn't necessarily have to be super individualized to this particular NPC either.
Right. No,
you're looking at the same kinds, physical security versus supernatural security, surveillance, size, those things are pretty constant. There's variability there, but they're the same factors that you're going each time.
I don't disagree with you at all right there. It's 100% true. The only thing I would say is that sometimes with the first few times you would go into a haven, it works. But then at a certain point, you don't want it to seem like every haven is the same. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you want to, sort of change it up, and that takes work. And it, because you think about some of the havens security.
Well, when I said a few, I would, somewhere in the ballpark of like 10.
Right.
And they'd all be different, but you would already have them. So
I was just thinking back to when running different LARPs, people would come to me and be like, this is what I want from Haven, and kind of laying things out and just being like, wow, holy, that was.
If only you had taken better notes.
You put some work into that, like real time and creativity and thinking of contingency plans and how are they going to try and get in, or where are the weak points in my Haven, and all, we're really thinking about it, because, some people, myself included, invested a lot of time into, different characters and games and LARPs that I played in and stuff, because it was fun. And it was sort of like a riddle, like you were making a riddle for someone to try and solve. Like if they made it to that level to where they could get to your Haven, right? It was sort of like a puzzle for them to solve to try and see if they could get to you, right? And so there was a certain amount of pride in knowing that if they failed, that you sort of won that battle without even being there, But all I'm getting to is those were a lot of work, and it was put in by people for their own characters. So whether or not it ever came up in game, it didn't matter because it was put in for their character. Whereas in this case, if you're putting together these games, I would be kind of bummed if I put a ton of work on a Haven and then it never came up. What I would probably do is just take that Haven and be like, boop, cool, that's the next one I've got for when they actually get to a Haven.
Right, yeah, so that's what I'm saying is, you basically have, set A, set B, set C, set D. Pick whichever one fits best, change some of the finer details to make it.
Okay, fair enough. Right on. No, I think it totally works. It just was like, wait a minute, because I'll tell you what, there are some creative people out there that, now granted, maybe not 100% feasible, but, it's in a role-playing game, what I mean? Like, we're all here to have fun anyway, who cares? So, yeah, lots of fun. Giovanni, you're terrible. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, well,
Well, like, walking into a house, basement goes down, pretty standard, right? And then there's this big, just open area of zombies.
This is the zombie pit.
So it's like, cool. Now my Haven is somewhere beyond this, right? So it's just like this open thing of zombies. You're like, you can kill them, beat them all, but whatever. I'll probably be awake, or you'll probably be overcome by the mob of them by the time, plus ghosts, plus. Too many entries. Terrible. So, right on. All right, I don't know. I just was kind of talked about that, and we started to talk. I thought, wow, it's kind of different, because I don't think we've really talked about Hunter stuff. Inquisitor stuff would be kind of cool to go into, more of like a Dark Ages sense of things for like Death by Pitchfork or something we always joke about, and kind of break down. I don't know.
We started semi-Inquisitor games, a lot of neat stuff there too. And I'm actually pretty intrigued with the second Inquisition that they've created, a new vampire system. Like, it's cool to consider.
I've got, I think the from regular Vampire the Masquerade, I think I have the Inquisition book, so I'll give it to you. It's now this one will be a little bit more modern, obviously, but it's got some cool stuff and it's got some neat things. So it kind of depends on which spin you want to take on it, whether you want to stay with the mundane faction of it, or if you want to go with the true faith aspect of it, which is kind of cool too. But the interesting thing with that is it's two specifically different flavors of things. Do you know what I mean? One is like special ops, CIA kind of stuff, and the other one is like righteous, godly,
entirely separate branch of the same organization.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see. Right on. Well, we'll let you know how it goes. I'm kind of interested to see, and we'll give you guys some updates as this goes along for giant debacles of hunting vampires and that kind of thing. But so, like I said, there's lots of resources out there to be able to run sort of unconventional vampire games. Like in this case, we're doing more of a hunter thing, and you could even do this with ghouls. Because I played in a game where we were all ghouls that were hunting vampires. We actually were hunting them for their blood. So there was a certain amount of like, don't necessarily kill it right away. Like kill it. Like it was like sort of like catch and not release, but like catch it and feed from it and destroy it or whatever. So there's a lot of really cool, interesting things you can do that's beyond just Hunter the Reckoning or Hunter the Vigil. Cool kind of fun things you can do. I've seen also there was a werewolf game where there's a small group of werewolves that were being manipulated by a vampire to kill specific targeted vampires that were in their way politically, which was an interesting game to kind of hear about. But
that makes for vampires too, right? Because you obviously would not tip off a hunter because that leads to a whole big problem for you. But if there was someone you could hire who was a vampire to get another vampire out of your way.
Well, the werewolf one was kind of similar. It was interesting because they weren't involved in the politics at all. And it was like an elder that was living on a longer time, like seeing things on a longer timeline, right? So the characters and players were all part of a small werewolf pack of like 4 or 5 werewolves or whatever. So they were being paid and manipulated by what they found out was a vampire many games later. But it was like, kill these creatures of the worm. They're terrible. They're, all this kind of like the classic werewolf stuff, right? And then lo and behold, the whole time they were just being manipulated by an elder. And so it was like, oh no. I mean, they still kill lots of vampires, so they're happy with that. But it was like, like, omelet, eggs, whatever, right? So it was all good. But I guess the only thing I'd say is that there's just lots of ways to do other Hunter games outside of just the classic Hunter, which can be a lot of fun and add a lot of different flavor to the games. And along with that, there's lots of different resources out there to add those sort of more interesting mundane elements, whether it's like equipment for a base or equipment for the individual characters or all kinds of different stuff. So, and Amazon and Google are your friend. There are loads of things that are just commercially available now that you can just look through and be like, wow, look at this.
Listen, be careful how much Googling you
do. Listen, I'm pretty sure that I'm on most lists because of role-playing games for LARP, like Googling things and being like, how would one do this? So, whatever. I guess be careful, but also you may already be there. So whatever, right? Right on. All right, well, I think that'll do it for us this week. So as you know, we're a member of the Gun Geek Network, so you can hop over to gungeeknetwork.com and check out loads of geek content there. If you like what we do here, you can head over to patreon.com/justformorefix and support us over there and get access to all of our raw audio feeds, pre-shows, and early access to episodes, as well as our zine, PDF, or print format, depending on what level you support at. And join the awesome ranks of our Patreon supporters like Alan White, Simon McNair, Alistair H., Timothy Barra, Hector Treelane, Tiziano Furlano, Paul Hubbard, and the OG Todd Olson. I think that'll do it for us this week, and we will see you all next week. Struggle. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can support us at patreon.com/justonemorefix or follow us on Twitter at Just One More Fix.